Thank you all for joining us here at the Institute for the Study of War this morning. My name is Kim Kagan. I'm the president of ISW. ISW is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is dedicated to ensuring that folks in government, whether they are civilians or whether they are in the military, our leaders, our thought leaders, have the best possible information about the on-the-ground situation in combat zones in order to help them formulate strategic decisions that are consistent with the facts on the ground. In addition, we have educational programs in military history, including the wonderful Hertog War Studies program for undergraduates. We have 3 veterans of that program here on our team, and it is a marvelous opportunity to help create the next generation of national security leaders. You can find us on the web at www.understandingwar.org. Thank you very much again for joining us, and I will hand over right now to Ahmed Ali, the Senior Iraq Analyst and Iraq Team Lead here at ISW, for the wonderful panel that you have joined this morning. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kim, and good morning, ladies. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure for us to host you here at ISW for this important occasion. I particularly have the honor and pleasure of introducing and moderating this session with 2 experts on Iraq and on the issues that relate to Iraq. Their bios are in your folders, so you can see them. You can also go to our website and read their bios, but very quickly we will start. To my left is Jessica Lewis, who is our research director. She has had tours of service in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she is an expert on the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, ISIS, the author of many reports, and over the last month you may have seen her on CNN or Fox News or a TV station. So I'm very honored to be able to present Jessica. Then to my right is Lieutenant General retired James Dubik. General Dubik also, he's a senior fellow here at ISW. He has long military service, including tours in Iraq. He was instrumental in working with the Iraqi security forces back in 2007, and he brings a great deal of experience and knowledge about the situation in Iraq and also about the status of the ISF. Before I turn it over to the panelists, I think it's important for us as a whole, and I'm looking at this audience, I can tell you a month ago or a month and a half ago, if we would have organized an event on Iraq, we would not have had this turnout. So I'm delighted to see this turnout, and it is a sign that Iraq, what is happening in Iraq today is not normal, even by the standards of Iraq. Iraq has experienced violence since 2003, and a lot of that violence has become normalized for many people, including for Iraqis. However, over the last month, what we have seen is a tremendous change in that pace. The Iraqi government currently does not have control over almost 40% of Iraq's territory. The Iraqi security forces are not in a very good shape to respond to the security threats. The theaters of Syria and Iraq are now completely merged. The Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, ISIS, which is the strongest Al-Qaeda inspired group, is now stronger than its predecessor, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI. The Iranian government, which has always had influence in Iraq since 2003, is now strongest, is more influential in the country. And in addition to that, we see that the U.S. government is more active in Iraq as well, but the reaction has not been as fast as it should be compared to the other governments, including the Iranian and regional governments, which have stepped in and provided assistance. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to Jessica, and she will tell us about the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, ISIS, for the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have General Dubik explain the status of the ISF and also the conditions in which it's operating under. So, Jessica?
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to speak to you today and to do so with my colleagues, General Dubik and with Ahmed. As Ahmed mentioned, my original professional career is in the military and specifically in the field of intelligence. So what I would like to frame for you today is an intelligence estimate of the Islamic Caliphate, which I will continue to refer to as ISIS, for this brief, because it has consistently been my observation that we are underestimating what this group is actually capable to do, and the best thing that we can do in order to inform an understanding of the threat that they actually pose, and in order to inform an understanding of what counter-strategy might actually be viable against them, is to understand what they are capable to do, what they intend to do, and what their strategy is, has been, and may still be. So to begin, ISIS is a religious organization. It is pursuing a political goal to establish an Islamic Caliphate that rests within its own sovereign territory. They have a grand strategy. It is coherent. It is already demonstrated. It depends upon military superiority to wrest control of terrain from modern states. We're already seeing this in Syria. We're already seeing this in Iraq. And we need to understand that that is actually what it is that they're trying to bring about. It is not just rhetoric. It is based upon military capacity to pursue this goal. I have described and anticipated that their political aims are as follows: permanently to break down political boundaries in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere in the region by cultivating conditions for government failure and/or a sectarian civil war. To establish the Islamic Caliphate by controlling terrain across Iraq and Syria, governing a population within, and defending that terrain against external threats. To bring in like-minded people, to fight alongside them, and potentially to settle within their new Islamic Caliphate. And then fourth, to expand their territory so that the Islamic Caliphate is able to connect to the rest of their perceived community. The Islamic Caliphate also puts out publications that communicate a synergy with this anticipated message, and I have to express confidence in all four of these original assessments that ISW published. I think this is what the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, now naming itself the Islamic Caliphate, is seeking to do. So what are they bringing to bear against this goal? I'd actually like to turn to a map. I think most people have a copy of what we had on the table at registration. It's a map that we've been publishing and updating to describe our estimate for where this Islamic Caliphate has military presence, where it has control, where it is attacking, and where it is able to connect those zones with what we call support zones across interior lines of communication. First thing I would like to do to describe this organization is to describe actually their military footprint in terms of zones of control that frame a military strategy to complete the formation of a state that they mean to control permanently. I will start with number 1, which on our map is on the Iraq side, just south of the city of Mosul, in a zone that ISIS actually established control in before the attack that we saw in the fall of Mosul a few weeks ago. This zone connects across the Jazeera Desert to an equivalent control zone that was previously established on the Syrian side. I've numbered it with the number 6. And if you go farther west across to al-Raqqa, which is the city that ISIS has controlled since January of 2014, around the number 5, you see a zone that it has been and continues to be a core strength area for this Islamic State's military. From that zone, ISIS has pushed south. ISIS has also pushed southwest. And you see an outer ring that connects the campaigns that we have just witnessed transform the situation in Iraq by taking control of areas that are part of the Sunni heartland on the Iraq side of the border that make it contiguous with the with the Syrian side, such that ISIS is able now to expand upon a core physical strength where states cannot compete to regain control. I also want to draw your attention to Baghdad, which I've numbered with the number 4 on your map. There is a ring north and south of Fallujah where ISIS has had control for over a year. A year ago, in the latter weeks of Ramadan of 2013, ISIS was able to break 500 people out of the Abu Ghraib prison. And it was one of those milestones where we recognized that this group was capable to do more than just conduct terrorist attacks, that they were also able to bring combined arms warfare to seize a fixed site that was under the control of state security and achieve a major campaign objective to culminate a year-long Breaking the Walls named offensive campaign in order to transition themselves to a style of warfare that depended upon leadership of prior generations of predecessor organizations, to include the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Qaeda in Iraq, in order to make that organization more capable in the long term to pursue these goals and objectives. Capitalizing upon our core insight from that moment in time, I really do want to describe what they were able to bring as additional capability as they were able to break former leadership out of prisons. Not just with the Abu Ghraib prison attack, but actually even the year prior, 9 months prior, actually September of 2012 is really when we start to see this organization able to designate objectives and accomplish them. ISIS broke some 38 senior leaders out of another prison in Tikrit. I'm dialing us back in time so that we understand that what has just happened is not a flash. Mosul did not just fall because something just went serendipitously right for ISIS. ISIS has also been developing its capability, regenerating its core leadership, reforming its strategy, reforming an institution that reminds me very much of an army over the course of several years, and that their campaign, particularly in Iraq, has been very controlled, has been proceeding along identifiable phases, and this is actually very much on track with a campaign that is not done yet. Okay. As I look at this terrain, and I'm describing the Abu Ghraib prison break last year as something that really did change the organization's footprint in terms of ground forces and leadership, we have to remember that that is very close to Baghdad. Abu Ghraib is, 30 kilometers west of Baghdad. So it is sadly not possible only to describe ISIS as having military strength far from Baghdad, in the Jazeera Desert, and pinned by 2 major capital cities in the west in Raqqa and Mosul in the north. They are projecting strength south, west, and actually east, because this connects to the Hammond Ridge system and onto northern Diyala, where we see there is plenty of kinetic activity simultaneously right now, marked with the number 2 on your map. Not only is ISIS able to do all of those things simultaneously, but they also have available force that I would sadly describe as in reserve right now, proximate to Baghdad. So you have likely seen my publications as of late to describe that there is still a threat to Baghdad. Sadly, I do not estimate that ISIS and its military capacity on the Iraq side has culminated, for the simple reason that the forces that are proximate to Baghdad were there already and have not engaged in the offensive we have seen thus far. So I expect that there is a likelihood that their planned offensive has not taken place yet. It is wise for us to estimate what that plan might be. It is appropriate for us to imagine that that organization is capable to adjust to what it is seeing happening in Baghdad, that it is able to distribute resources and manpower as it designates phased main efforts, that we have seen them do this from the Iraq side of their campaign across to the Syrian side, and that over the course of the time that all of us have been adjusting to a new reality of a capable ISIS projecting force inside of urban centers in Iraq, ISIS has also been pursuing offensives on the Syrian side. As you see on this map, just south of the number 6, in the region of Deir ez-Zor, which is just across on the Syrian side from Anbar province, I'm designating it as a largely ISIS-controlled area now. It didn't look that way 2 weeks ago. We need to understand, very much as Ahmed described, that ISIS is on the offensive on both fronts. And sadly, they still have the initiative strategically. So my main goal right now is to describe what it is that they are still capable to do so that we can understand how to get ahead of them. I think it's very important for us not to underestimate what they are aiming to do, their strategic capacity to plan, adjust, consolidate, and move out with new phases. It also what it is that they are presently capable to project as a threat to the state of Iraq, which I do believe they are going to manifest before the end of Ramadan with attacks that are directed against the capital and against the Iraqi security forces' primary bases. Circling back on what it is that we saw the organization demonstrate over the last 2 years, there's another key point I want to make. This is a terrorist organization. It is still delivering terrorist attacks. This organization is also capable of guerrilla-style warfare. It is also capable of conventional warfare. Having that range means that they can prosecute hybridized warfare, which makes it actually very difficult to imagine what the strategy needs to be in order to retake Mosul, in order for Syrians to retake Raqqa. Nothing short of that is going to preserve Iraq and Syria against the threat of an Islamic caliphate that is going to consolidate and defend territory that includes those cities and potentially others. And we need to be thinking in terms of what actually is going to be required to oust them from those capitals if we're actually going to have a conversation about the survival of modern states, particularly Iraq and Syria at this time. Now, saying that, which is a very scary assessment, it's also very possible for us, once we have an estimate of the capabilities of this organization, also to identify classically, as intelligence analysts traditionally do, critical requirements and critical vulnerabilities and critical capabilities that make this organization not just formidable in a measurable way, but also vulnerable. This is a military enemy. It's a formidable one, but it is not invincible. ISIS is not invincible. It is possible, for example, to look at this map and see that ISIS requires interior and exterior lines of communication to operate. It is possible to look at this layered series of regenerated leadership echelons and see that this organization is vulnerable to leadership cleavages. It is also possible to understand that military force generation is a capacity that is a signature core strength of this organization. These kinds of assessments give us room to develop counter strategies. So, if we look at what the organization has been able to do, Mosul did happen, okay? And we work backwards to how it is that they were able to do that. We find that there's actually quite a bit of room to develop strategies, political, military strategies that provide room for regional solutions that can actually counter ISIS in an effective way. It is sincerely my goal that we can discuss these, and I would also like to express the gravity of the situation in terms of what we are looking at if we don't have that discussion right now. I interpret, among other things, that the declaration of the Islamic Caliphate removes barriers that constrain ISIS to Iraq and Syria. I do expect that ISIS is going to pose a genuine threat to Lebanon and to Jordan and to other states in the region, and that their ambition is not locally bound. So if we have a military force that is as capable as we have seen it, it is necessary for us to address this in the context of an expanding threat that proceeds with a vision by conquest with a military forces at its disposal that sadly grows stronger as it moves. It gets greater military capacity as it takes over bases. It gets greater finance as it takes over banks. It gets more foreign fighters and local fighters as it is able to project a message of military victory, which happily also gives us a tremendous opportunity to imagine what actually happens to that organization now that it has required itself to continue to be militarily victorious in order to sustain all of these primary strengths. That makes them vulnerable too, in a strategic way, as does the declaration of a caliphate, which if they mean that actually as a polity that is going to sit on terrain, which is what they've described in their most recent English language magazines, that is going to be a physical presence, it means that they have to develop statecraft, and it means that they have to defend that terrain. It actually makes them more brittle from a strategic perspective. So there are things that we can do with the reality of ISIS to contend with them, but it will not suit to underestimate what it is that they are capable yet to do. They will continue to stay ahead of us if we let them do that, and therefore I offer this as a sobering but useful estimate to give us a way forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica, for this detailed presentation. And before I turn it over to General Dubik, I will be remiss if I did not thank you for your service in the U.S. military and for this, for our nation. And also, General Dubik, I want to thank you as well for your service for this nation. With that, the floor is yours, General.
Sure, thanks. Well, thanks all of you for coming. It's so nice to see many faces that I've served with before, sometimes in dangerous situations, sometimes just in complex situations. But it's nice to see you. I'm going to first present a few thoughts on the context from which I'm going to talk about the Iraqi security forces. My overall comments will not be in the detail that you want, but that's why we have a question and answer period. And I look forward for the discussion of the Iraqi security forces in that form. Some of you have traveled recently to Iraq and have some granularity in terms of the security forces, and I think the group will benefit from the question and answer period from that regard as well. So first, some comments on context. In my view, the issue starts with U.S. security interests. The United States, in my view, has three security interests at stake here, one main and two secondary. The main one is to prevent the ISIS entity from solidifying and to react to the use of force as the means to change international sovereign boundaries. This is a hugely important interest and should, I think, govern the way we think about this problem. The other two secondary are preventing Iraq from becoming a client state of Iran. There's always going to be relationships between Iraq and Iran. That's natural, that's necessary, and in some aspect is good. But becoming a client state, not in the interest of the United States. And then second, to help Iraq create a stable political arrangement of some sort that can perform better than it has in the last few years. So from my standpoint is I take the first interest and ask myself, so what are the objectives relative to this first main security interest? I think there are four. First is to assist the Iraqi Special Operations Forces, which are pretty capable still, in conducting direct action raids against ISIS networks, facilities, and personnel. Second, I think our objective should be assist the Iraqi security forces, and by that I primarily mean Iraqi Army and federal police, even though we use ISF as an umbrella term. They're two separate entities. To assist the ISF in planning and executing a counteroffensive to reestablish the Iraqi border. Third, of course, to protect and sustain U.S. personnel. And then last, to support the Iraqis who are resisting or who want to resist ISIS control. So the main security interest and four objectives. To achieve these objectives, I think the Iraqi security forces needs the following kinds of assistance. More intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance efforts. Some of this has already been increased. Intelligence analysts to interpret the information and help translate the information into actions. Air forces that can deliver targeted and precise air fires. Special operations forces that can provide a variety of assistance. Planning cells, and I'll get to this in a little bit more detail, but they need planning cells to plan, prepare, and execute a counteroffensive campaign. They have zero capacity to do at least two unconventional warfare entities of some sort. And I use a vague language because this unconventional warfare stuff has a precise language that I don't want to violate. But I think we ought to conduct unconventional warfare assistance in both the Kurdistan Regional Government area and with the Sunni tribes in the western Iraq. Next, the Iraqi security force and the Iraq government needs some kind of special task force to expedite equipment delivery, whether through FMS or direct sales, to the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior. The way we have been doing this just flat is broken and is part of the problem. And then last, some form, in my view, even though I'm an Army guy, I'm going to give a plug to my Marine buddies, some form of joint Marine Air Ground Task Force. And I say joint because I think they'll have to be beefed up with logistic elements to sustain and to take on the sustain and protect mission for a temporary basis. Now, this effort has to be within the context of a determined diplomatic engagement with Iraq and a beefed up embassy staff. So with that as a background, let me just now say a few general things about the Iraqi security forces. Of course, we created the Iraqi security forces to succeed against a certain level threat, basically an internal threat to mid to low grade terrorism and insurgency. And we assumed, as we built the force, a degree of continual improvement in both the tactical forces and the institutions of the Ministry of Defense, Interior, and Iraqi Joint Forces. Reality has made both of these moot. The threat is increased. It's not just internal. It's well beyond mid-grade. And improvement has been derailed at least since 2011. And I could argue started before then. The threat has increased partially because of government of Iraq's policies. No need to sugarcoat that. The government of Iraq has first decided to use the Office of Commander-in-Chief rather than the regular chain of command. That's eroded the chain of command. They've also used the Office of Commander-in-Chief for advice to the Prime Minister primarily, rather than the Chief of the Iraqi Joint Forces and the ministries. The ministerial development is stymied because the Prime Minister has become the Minister of the Defense and Interior, and has stressed loyalty rather than proficiency in the selection of leadership in command positions and promotion. The second set of activities that have eroded the Iraqi security forces is, of course, the deliberate and sustained targeting by the ISIS forces for about 2 years of intimidation, assassination, and infiltration of the Iraqi security forces. And last, in 2011, neither government could come to an agreement, so the assumed continued engagement stopped. That said, my view is the Iraqi security forces collapse is not universal. They have demonstrated the ability to conduct local counterattacks, defenses, and their credibility is recoverable. But this recovery will only result from a deliberate effort, sustained effort, some demonstration of reasonable probability of success, and an increase in proficiency of leadership, both government and security forces. So I can get into all kind of details about the elements of these, but I think that should be enough to prime the pump, whet appetites, and get right to the questions. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, General. And before I turn it over to you all, I see this is a very distinguished audience. It always is in all events, but this is especially distinguished. So I'll turn it over to you. But before I do that, I want to summarize what you just heard from Jessica and from General Dubik. For ISIS, it is important to understand, and what Jessica has told us is that this is an ideologically driven organization. It is also militarily a well-organized organization. It's not only a terrorist organization, it operates as an army. It is an organization that is seeking to expand territory. That what happened in Mosul was not a surprise. This was predicted, and ISIS has gone through stages to prepare the ground for taking control of Mosul and other cities, and that we should expect further advances by ISIS to possibly other countries. For the general slide, talking about discussing the other side, the significance of not allowing ISIS to consolidate its gains and solidify its gains in Iraq, that the performance of the security forces and what transpired over the last month is also the result of systemic problems within the Iraqi security forces, including leadership from the Prime Minister office or the Minister of Defense, and even divisional leadership. And thirdly, and very importantly, that there has to be a political solution in conjunction with the military solution. These are great points, and it's important for me to say as well that the political solution will be needed. However, the developments on the ground are moving very fast, and there has to be thinking about accelerating a military solution in Iraq, and significantly, there has to be an understanding that Iraqi politics is slow. It's a machine. It's a big machine, and I love studying it. But it's a slow-moving machine that's not going to resolve this Sunday as is expected, or even this week. Therefore, a military solution has to be accelerated by those who want to change the situation on the ground. Of course, with what Jessica discussed, an important question, and that's before I turn it over to the audience. I just have two questions for Jessica and for General Dubik. The important question that always comes up and has come up over the last month is this only ISIS taking territory and controlling terrain and attacking the security forces and essentially ensuring that the Iraqi government does not have control over other territory? Or are you seeing other groups involved in this insurgency?
Thank you. I think that is a key question as we understand the gravity of the situation in Iraq at present. The simple answer is no, it is not just ISIS. There are other Sunni militant groups. There are likely also Ba'athist-affiliated groups and or Ba'athist-organized umbrellas that are intending to try to capture and organize that effort. And that right now it looks mostly like that is working at least in the same direction as ISIS in terms of pushing back the Iraqi security forces. Now, the other side of this that I really want to send home is that it is not only the Sunni population that is mobilized at present against the government, it is also very much the Shia population that has volunteered either previously to participate in Shia militias that are integrated with the Iraqi security forces, but also with civilian mobilizations, and that these forces are being deployed forward into Sunni heartland cities like Ramadi and like Tikrit. So we really do have a second situation here that isn't just ISIS against the Iraqi state security forces. We really do have a mobilized population that is in mutual contact. And we do need to consider what that means for counter-ISIS strategies, because we are potentially talking about counter-ISIS strategies that target the Sunni population, either civilians that are not mobilized or forces that are, that exacerbate this second dimension. We are potentially talking about coalition efforts with the Iraqi security forces that are also with Shia militias and with Iran. So this is a textured problem. I do not wish to oversimplify it, but what I also wish to describe is that ISIS brought this about in Iraq on purpose, and that it is still very much an ISIS-driven problem. And the more that this becomes a sectarian civil war, an ethno-sectarian civil war in Iraq, the stronger ISIS becomes and the more capable they are to emerge as the sovereign and defendable polity at the end of this. So that still brings me very much to the threat of ISIS as what needs to galvanize a unified effort that prevents the fallout that would come from a sectarian civil war That is actually the requirement to overcome that present dimension in order to bring all forces to orient on ISIS. But to answer your question, no, it is not just ISIS fighting the state.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. And General, this is a great segue for my question that I had for you, which is for countering ISIS. For those of you familiar with the history of the last 10 years in Iraq, key component of defeating AQI, ISIS's predecessor in Iraq back in 2006 and 2007, was the mobilization of the Iraqi Sunni tribes in Anbar province, in Salah ad-Din, and other areas. For this particular challenge, how do you think the Iraqi Sunni tribes should be integrated within an ISF structure or as a counter-ISIS force?
Well, of course, it was hard last time to use the Sunni tribes as part of the counteroffensive campaign to defeat al-Qaeda. It'll be harder this time. The trust level, not very high. We helped mobilize them once. We helped integrate them into Iraqi security forces or as government structure once. And then things didn't work out. Just leave it that way. So they're not going to be immediately smiling when we return. Now, that said, they don't want to live under the ISIS-type government either. So there is an opportunity, I think, that is a delicate one, but one that is an opportunity to engage the Sunni tribes again. This was part of the reason, I think, that as we figure out our assistance, the unconventional help to both the Sunni tribes and the Kurds, Peshmerga, is important. We need to reach out to them as well as to the government of Iraq. And I think that reach out will be possible. Now, in terms of linking it to the effort with the Sunni tribes to the government, I think personally my first intuition would be to link it to police forces, government police forces, not military forces, that the tribal military councils that would work could be translated into local police, special police mission units like SWAT teams, and separate UNBAR federal police organizations. This, again, will be delicate and difficult. The money that flows to police forces in Iraq goes from central government to UNBAR. So the money trail will have to be part of the discussion to make sure that the money actually does flow to these forces after the ISIS entity is defeated. This is a necessary but very difficult component, and the Peshmerga, I think, as well, because they'll watch very closely what support we provide for the Sunni tribes and expect some degree of support for them naturally. And I think if we think of our support as support to the government, support to the Kurds, support to the Sunni tribes in a balanced way, this actually gives us some leverage for development and improvement in the governmental activities post-crisis phase.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General. And one last question before I turn it over to the audience. Jessica, you mentioned the contiguous theater for ISIS between Iraq and Syria. There's a very simple question. Can you defeat ISIS in Iraq without targeting its bases in Syria?
No, I do not think you can defeat ISIS without targeting their bases in Syria. However, I think you may be able to preserve the Iraqi state if you eliminate their bases and their presence in urban centers on the Iraq side.
Okay.
Oh, I apologize. No, I do not think you can defeat ISIS by targeting them only on the Iraq side. I do think, however, that if you target them and you eliminate their presence in urban centers and major support zones on the Iraq side, you may give Iraq a chance.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. Now we're going to open it up for question and answer, and we have a number of house rules. and housekeeping rules. Please, when we're going to have our staff, wonderful staff members walking around with microphones. When I call on you, please wait for the microphone. When you get the microphone, please state your name, state your affiliation, and direct your question to a panelist if you can. That's preferable, actually. If you can do that, I'll give you priority. I'll let you ask the question. Additionally, please make sure that your question, your statement ends with a question mark. If it doesn't, then it's going to take a while. So we'll start with the first row here. But wait for the microphone, sir.
Yeah, my name is Chris Isham with CBS News. Question for Jessica. What do you see as the objective on the part of ISIS, particularly vis-a-vis Baghdad? I mean, you've got control zones around Baghdad and Fallujah and Ramadi to some extent, but what do you see as when you're looking at the maps and their pattern of activity? What do you think they're after in the Baghdad area, and specifically in the city, but also the airport? I'm particularly interested in what your analysis is of their objectives vis-a-vis the airport.
Thank you very much. Jessica.
Absolutely. I see that ISIS can potentially do two things in Baghdad, and intentionally so. Okay. How does this sound? Is it better? Okay, wonderful. I think ISIS is going to go for bases. There are 3 bases that I think are vulnerable, and I think ISIS is going to target them. On the northern side of Baghdad, we have Balad and Taji, and on the immediate southwest side of Baghdad, we have the international airport. I think all 3 of those facilities are ones that ISIS could target with direct fire, with indirect fire, with ground forces, or in some combination, which is how we saw the prison breaks occur a year and a half ago in order to take on the Iraqi security forces directly. I can also see ISIS going for fortified targets that represent the seat of government in Baghdad, and I'm therefore very concerned about ISIS tactical approaches that can make the green zone vulnerable. I think particularly the surface-to-air threat is potential and has not really manifested yet, and I think that the opportunity to use indirect fire systems in a direct fire capacity against fortified positions is something we should recognize ISIS has the capability to do, and that could manifest in the context of Baghdad.
Thank you very much.
Is it your view that they want to take Baghdad?
No, I think they want to turn Baghdad into a war zone, but to deny it as a seat of government, to deny it as a protected capital, and to deny it as a perceptually Shia capital.
Cool. Going to, yeah, sir. Just wait for the microphone, please.
Well, I'll hold it. You have to hold it. Okay. This is the first time anyone's done anything for me in the last 10 years. That's not true.
This is to make
General
sure
Dubik knows I've been in Baghdad for 10 years. Until March of this year, I was there. So I appreciate very much the insights you and Jessica have shared with us today. 2 points by way of question. First of all, to what extent do you think it's in U.S. interest to more actively, right now, open negotiations with the Kurdistan regional government for assisting them develop more capabilities in Peshmerga, realizing that they are supposed to be guards of the region by the Constitution and not a regularly constituted armed force, but they are in fact. And they can be extremely helpful, it seems to me, in those areas that are most attractive to ISIS and that up to now have been the best protected for them. So why not open a second front and use Kurdistan as the basis? Regardless of what Baghdad says, Baghdad will not be able to object. They'll gain from it. So that's one. And the second one has to do with intelligence. An observation first. In the last 10 years, it seems to me that the capabilities of Iraqi human intelligence have badly deteriorated to the point where it's essentially totally dysfunctional. And the analysis part has collapsed completely in spite of the integrating mechanisms that the coalition, particularly the U.S., helped them put in place, because They won't share with each other, and they insist on keeping the stovepipes directly to the prime minister. So what is it in intelligence other than ISR, which will produce interesting blips, but won't give them a darn thing for human that they seriously need? What is the most important thing to do to shore up ISF intelligence now?
Thank you very much, sir. And just for the record, we're holding the microphone for you so you can move your hands when you talk. You know, you can have hand motion. That's why we're doing this. That's very Iraqi. So, General, please.
Yeah, so first, just for matter of record, Roy gave me my first job in the Pentagon. So, and it didn't throw me out after a couple of months, which I appreciated. Look, part of the reason that I think an unconventional warfare approach is necessary is just for the reasons that you lay out. I think helping the Kurds attack ISIS from the Kurdistan regional area is very important, very useful in the near term in terms of the reestablishing the Iraqi border. But I think in the long term, to help give them more leverage than they have in the creation of a post-crisis Iraqi government. Now, this has to be, I think, very carefully, I mean, you're going to know the answer to this, very carefully orchestrated, because there are some trends in the Kurdistan regional area that want independence, which we, and I think other actors in the region would not want to encourage. So somewhere between the space of current state and encouraging a separate Kurdistan state, somewhere between those extremes, I think there's room for help in the near term against the ISIS entity, prevent them from consolidating, and help in the longer term stability in the government.
Thank you very much. Jessica, please.
Wonderful. So to the question of what the Iraqi security force intelligence apparatus could possibly do better or use going forward, I'd actually like to answer 3 ways. The first way is to describe how the observable information environment and warfare has changed in the last couple of years, and how it is that we are actually able at ISW to conduct intelligence from open sources. And the demand signal for human-based intelligence as a primary way to understand what's going on is actually very much adjusted, in my view, based upon where we get information now. And the activity of social media delivery of information from civilians, from ISIS, and from other forces is a very interesting development in terms of textured information and visibility on wars that absolutely change how it is that we understand Iraq and Syria in particular. So that is available to the Iraqi security forces now to make an intelligence analytical effort. But also to your point about human intelligence networks, if you have no visibility on what is going on inside the Sunni heartland because there is no conversation with civilians, then you have an intelligence gap. So yes, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily describe that as a specific surgical intelligence requirement. I would describe it as a wholesale connection to the rest of the Iraqi population that is behind enemy lines at the moment, and how it is that that is framed also for its opportunity to provide intelligence and insight to the Iraqi government. The third is also the description of one of the consequences that ISIS incurs as it ranges from terrorism to guerrilla warfare to conventional warfare. One of the consequences of having a conventional warfare footprint is that it is a higher signature. You start to take on characteristics like fixed sites, repeatable processes, robust interior lines that actually make you more vulnerable. So from an ISR perspective, ISIS should be more visible now than AQI was a few years ago. So I think from an intelligence perspective, there's actually a lot of opportunity to get ahead of and remain ahead of ISIS.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica. And just let me just add to that, because it's such a great question on the intelligence. What we have seen, and this is through our research over the last year and a half, is on one hand, the ISF doesn't have good intelligence, especially on individuals. On the other hand, ISIS has very good intelligence. ISIS very much knows who is influential in every area, and it goes after that individual. And there have been many cases to prove it. So it's a major gap for the Iraqi security forces. So we'll take the third row. Identify yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Mark Kim, and I write for Oxford Analytica. One of the issues is in the formation of the caliphate. That's sort of inconsequential in the long run to the United States. I mean, it does have some consequence, and to Europe as well. But those who have most to fear by the establishment of the caliphate are the Gulf monarchies. I didn't hear in your strategy at all how the Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, how they can be brought into the process, because they've probably got the largest stake in the outcome of the caliphate than we do, than Iran does, than Europe does. So has there been any consideration of where they might fit into the overall strategy? And this is a question for Jim Dubik.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. Actually, yes, I think simultaneously with the kind of security assistance that outlined, I think there should be a proper diplomatic effort made in bringing the border states, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Turkey, Israel, and I think Iran, into some kind of diplomatic discussion that would give the region a little bit better structure to handle these kind of problems. I don't know what will happen from that. Of course, there'll be all kind of problems trying to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran in the same room and all that kind of stuff. But absent some kind of regional effort, this problem will just replicate itself. And so I think there is a diplomatic effort that has to be made.
Great, thank you, General. Before I turn it over to the audience, please raise your hand. Get my attention.
Can I ask one more?
Yes.
Mark, also, beside that international, there's a humanitarian assistance effort that's part of this. I mean, you look around the regions, you can spot all the displaced persons and refugees that are all through the region, not just in Iraq, but Syria, Jordan. I mean, this is a part of the international part of the problem that we may get some traction in getting work together on that, and then using that traction on other more difficult topics.
Okay. So just to follow up on that, General, a very quick question. One of the things that has happened over the last month is the full deployment of Iraq Shia militias along the Iraq security forces, and that is seen as a negative development by many, maybe necessary, but negative nonetheless. What do you think are the long-term consequences of that development, of the Iraq Shia militias fully integrated with the ISF?
Well, in the near term, they may be helpful in stemming the offense and providing some additional forces for the local counterattack. But in the long run, my view is this is not a helpful development. First, for any state to have two separate security, official and unofficial security, this is not a good thing for a state. So I think that's got to factor into it. Second, the probability of a spiral into worse sectarian violence increases the more militias are thrown into the mix. So I don't see this as a positive development, even if in the near term it's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General. Any other questions? So right before the General came in. Right. Yeah.
Hello, Tom Lynch, retired. Question for General Dubik. Jim, how do you expect that the ISF will be able to absorb, and ISF and FP will be able to absorb and use expedited deliveries of advanced weapons when up to now they have lost the stuff?
Well, thanks, Tom. Some they will not. I mean, some advanced weaponry, if we accelerate it, they simply will not have the capacity to absorb it. My view, F-16s are like this. But there are other kinds of advanced equipment, missiles, Hellfire missiles, for example, where they can absorb it. So my comment about the equipment is not so much that we want to give them everything that they're asking for, but our current system of foreign military sales and permissions for direct sales is so bad, has been for a long time. I've been on public record for this for a long time, but is so bad, it's an obstacle to even accomplishing the security aims that the United States has before this crisis, let alone during a crisis. And part of the opportunity here in reacting to the crisis is to highlight the importance of an expedited process for both foreign military sales and direct sales. Because without it, even the equipment they can absorb, do need, want, and will pay for, we can't deliver that to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's take a question from the back, actually. Phil, right next to you, to your left. Yeah.
Eddie Becker, filmmaker. How much of the weapons that the bad guys are using originated from stocks supplied by the United States and their allies?
Okay, it's a good question, General.
Yeah, well, too much. I mean, there's no way I can put a percentage on it, but then they've overrun Iraqi units and taken all the equipment and distributed it. It's partially in Iraq and part in Syria. And this is, of course, abominable. There's no other way to describe it. But we're not their only source of equipment. They got quite a bit from us, no doubt about it.
Jessica, would you like to comment on that question? And how ISIS is likely to use those weapons, or what kind of advantage it gets from acquiring those weapons?
So most of what we have actually seen in ISIS social media is pictographic evidence of vehicles that have likely come from the Mosul International Airport and other bases in the north. And we've seen them travel back and forth to other fronts, particularly across the Iraq-Syria border back into Syria. So I think my direct takeaway is actually the opportunity to express small arms and medium-sized weapons equipment overmatch against other forces that are in the Sunni heartland is one of the significant observations concerning what it is that they have acquired from indirectly U.S. arsenals. I mean, we are talking also about indirect fire systems. We're also talking about artillery that we've seen images of on ISIS social media as well, and potentially that indirect fire can manifest against Iraqi security forces. Still, we haven't seen them used yet, but I would just express that we've seen those pieces also in their social media. The main threat that I actually see is what it means for a Sunni tribe that wants to fight ISIS to see armored personnel carriers and LMTVs and Humvee convoys with U.S. small and medium-sized weapons rolling their way. What it means for the Syrian opposition to see that. It's overmatch at a tactical level, in my view, and particularly when we have beleaguered forces on the Syrian side and we see equipment going there, I do see that some of this equipment is actually going to be a game-changing advantage for ISIS. Unless we actually start seeing U.S. artillery systems fired against the Iraqi security forces, I would describe that as a potential threat, but I think that potential is there. And we should start imagining the vulnerability of fortified positions to indirect fire. We're already seeing mortars, and mortars themselves are a lethal layer of that threat.
Thank you very much. Nate, second row.
Hi, Colin Tucker, Eurasia Center. If I could actually expand on that, what expertise or capability do ISIS fighters have in operating these T-55, T-72 tanks and howitzer cannons that we see they have possession of?
Okay, thank you. Jessica?
Okay. I don't expect that ISIS is going to have ready technical capability to operate U.S. systems, but I do expect that ISIS has within their ranks Saddam-era military professionals and commanders, and probably also technical experts. So if we frame that question in terms of what comprised their arsenal before, we should estimate that there is a likelihood that there are systems, formal military systems, complex systems that they are capable to operate. that with U.S. systems, there is potentially a learning curve. It is one that would need to be overcome. But shortly, we should not expect that this is an organization that can only detonate homemade explosives. They have demonstrated the ability to develop a strategic calculus. That, to me, is a higher lift than figuring out how to drive a tank. So I think it's a reality. We need to consider these pieces are on the ground.
Thank you very much. Let's go all the way to the back, actually. Last row, so we'll give the people in the back a chance. They deserve it as well. All the way in the back, yeah.
Thomas Bono, Hard Energy Research and Consulting. A question about how integrated these more moderate Sunnis and ex-Ba'athist generals are with ISIS, and if the U.S. gets involved in providing direct or indirect, I guess we're already providing indirect counterinsurgency support, if we risk sort of exacerbating the situation and creating or reinforcing this perception that the U.S. is supporting the Shia against the Sunni in Iraq.
Is your question directed to a specific panelist or to the whole panel?
To anyone who wants to answer it.
Okay. Go ahead, Jessica.
Forgive me, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Can you repeat the question?
So basically, do we have the capability to sort of separate ISIS from these more moderate Sunnis that are fighting alongside them? Are there, particular ISIS units that we can target, or is it going to be more difficult to sort out those different elements?
I think my answer is actually fairly short. I think it's going to be very difficult to sort out. I don't think that precludes a likelihood that at some point forces that are not loyal to ISIS that are fighting the Iraqi government right now are not going to desire to turn on ISIS. But I am concerned for a lot of the reasons that we've already mentioned, that there is an organization overmatch and an equipment overmatch that is in favor, and a funding overmatch that is in favor of ISIS over these forces. So I hope that they self-identify, but I actually don't expect that they're necessarily going to self-identify while it's not safe for them to do so. So at the present moment, no, I don't think I can distinguish in all the ways that I would feel comfortable doing in order to isolate ISIS away from every other element that is not through and through for ISIS.
Thank you.
The other half of your question is, will our intervention become de facto sectarian by supporting just the Shia and the government? And I think this is an important question, and I think the answer has to be we cannot intervene in such a way that all we do is support the sectarian aspects of the government. That's part of the reason I think the assistance for the Sunni tribes and for the Peshmerga in the Kurdistan regional area is an important part of the assistance that we should offer. It's with all the balance and all the caveats that I've said before, and I could add some more. But without doing something with separately with the Sunni tribes and the Kurdistans, I think we increase the risk that the perception is that we're part of the sectarian support, and I think that would be wrong of us to do that.
Okay, thank you. This row, gentleman right there. Hey. Raise your hand so I can get you the microphone.
Yes, Brian Marshall. I've been serving with some international agencies as well as on temporary appointments with the Department of State in Iraq. As it is, some things that General Dubik was saying about our need to reach out to the Sunni population and also to the Kurds. It would seem extremely difficult without a change in the leadership of the Iraqi government. I'm referring, of course, to Prime Minister Maliki. This may require some conjecture on your part, but do you see that as a possibility?
Well, I mean, you just read the newspapers and you see it as a possibility. But from my recommendations in terms of the kinds of assistance that I laid out is not based on the change of government. It's based on what's necessary to address our security interest, and that is preventing an ISIS entity from solidifying and reacting to the use of force as the means to erase internationally recognized sovereign borders. So if there are consequences, which there may well be, second and third order consequences of protecting our interest, then we should be ready to deal with that. My personal opinion, which I think you asked, is that we should act in our interest independent of or waiting for some kind of radical behavioral change in Baghdad, and that our interests are our interest. Then if there ultimately is a change, that change should take place in a more natural political way than some kind of forced or precondition.
Okay, let me take that's a good question. Let me just take a quick attempt at answering some of it. The Prime Minister, of course, he has been in office for 8 years, and many of you in the audience know this, and that has caused many of his opponents to say maybe it's time for him to step down. Of course, Prime Minister Maliki competed in the elections with his bloc, and they achieved good results. So everybody is looking at those results, examining the possibilities. And there is an ongoing discussion at the moment about the role that Prime Minister Maliki can play in the next government. But as I said earlier, there has to be a political solution, but that political solution should not prevent a quick military response and military action in Iraq against ISIS, because Iraqi politics moves very slowly. Okay. Let's take a question on that row.
The question is to Jessica.
Identify yourself.
Adel Awad, ATFP. Question to Jessica. You talked briefly about the relationship between Ba'ath elements and ISIL, but I still think there's still more questions to be answered. There's so much confusion, especially on the Arabic side of media, the Middle East, about the nature of Daesh, the origin of Daesh, its relationships and coalitions with other tribal leaders, Sunni leaders locally. But the specific question is how integrated this Daesh is with the proper Ba'ath party, specifically Izzat al-Duri.
Okay. Thank you, Adam.
So we've already seen in Iraq a few indicators that there is not a direct...
So Jessica, if you don't mind, Adil used the term, which is Daesh. That's the Arabic term for ISIS, the Arabic acronym for ISIS. So my apologies, Jessica. Go ahead.
Excellent. There are already indicators that there are both either retired or former Iraqi army elements in Mosul that have been rounded up by ISIS with concern that they're going to compete for influence over an organized resistance against ISIS. This is a very good sign that the synergy is not fundamentally intact between forces that are not purely ideologically ISIS and ISIS themselves. We have also seen clashes at the tactical level between other gunmen and ISIS in along the Hamon Ridge in Kirkuk and all the way down to northern Diyala. I believe we've seen those clashes in and around Jalula. So in short, there are indicators that ISIS is not running everybody, and I do not have anything to suggest that there is a high-level agreement between leaders of an Izzat-al-Duri level and ISIS. What I do expect is that if there are other formalized plans for a post-ISF control of the Sunni heartland future or a post-Iraq future, that Ba'athist leaders at large would be forming a plan and that plan is lent to incredible advantage by an ISIS offensive against the Iraqi security forces that drives them out of the Sunni heartland. So shortly, I agree. I don't think we've seen all of that story play out yet. I think there is more than one calculus at play, but I also see that the strongest and most capable and most organized military force that is driving this whole train is still ISIS. And I don't see there being a competition at the operational level that would be meaningful against ISIS forming at the tribal level, at the Ba'athist organizational level, at a Sunni resistance level, or at the Iraqi state level that effectively integrates any of these as part of a joint effort to counter ISIS.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question all the way in the back. The lady has been very patient with us.
Thank you. Oops. Leandra Bernstein, RIA Novosti. This is a question for Ms. Lewis about, there have been reports of Westerners going into Iraq and Syria to fight as jihadis. What are the implications of that? People with European, even American passports have been detained. So what are the implications of that? And also, where does the West stand in terms of responsibility for the spread of the jihadi movement?
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you very much. Good questions. Jessica.
So the first question about the broader foreign fighter advantage that is lent by an ISIS that controls terrain in Iraq and Syria, and specifically how that is framed in the context of Western jihadis, yes, I would say it's a huge threat. We used to speak of this in terms of safe haven, as if safe haven were simply an area where ISIS or other groups would have freedom of movement in order to sustain themselves, grow stronger, train in the desert, resource attacks that would only projected outwardly. We're now talking about terrain like that exists also in urban centers with military bases where training can be conducted, with military equipment. The formative military experience that a foreign fighter gets by traveling to Iraq and Syria to fight with ISIS is extraordinary. Now, we also traditionally have seen foreign fighters routed primarily towards the suicide operations. So in many ways, coming in is and has been historically a one-way ticket. However, I do not think that it is all that extraordinary when we see Western foreign fighters displayed in ISIS social media, when we see their formal periodicals. They're putting out English language magazines regularly now. They put out the Declaration of the Caliphate in multiple languages, messaging back to potential foreign fighters in the West to encourage them to come and be a part of a movement. And I would actually describe that that is a pretty significant step change in the messaging. It's not just come and fight and be a martyr. It's come and live in Raqqa. So we've got a very different phenomenon now in terms of what ISIS is trying to get out of the foreign fighter community, and that includes being a part of a caliphate vision, and that's actually how we need to frame the threat that is projected back to the West now. It is a significant threat that is being encouraged, among other things, by ISIS by elevating this out of just a terrorism domain and into one of a caliphate. Now, in terms of Western responsibility for the regeneration of jihadism broadly, I think there are so many things that contribute to this specific situation with ISIS that I want to try to find an opportunity to say that there are a few things that can still be done that are meaningful. Okay. We have a former terrorist group that has a military capacity and a post-state vision now. It has a tremendous fundraising base. It has a tremendous outreach base, and it is reaching out and sending pings to foreign fighters throughout the rest of the world. What I see as the requirement is to deal with this as a threat that is shared by the West, by the region, by all the populations we've been describing in Iraq and also in Syria, that this is a threat to the entire global community. and very much the U.S. and the West in part. So I suppose I actually am not answering that question because I think that the more urgent one is what do we do now? And that's the one that's capturing all of my intellectual space.
Okay,
I hope that's helpful.
So we have a question, third row, Nate. Gentleman right here.
All right, good morning. Mike Rienzi, U.S. Navy. Questions for Jessica. Have you seen any indications of ISIS trying to recruit a former scientist that worked under Saddam Hussein in the WMD program?
No, but I would be looking for that about right now. So thank you. What we have seen is, this is about a week ago, a call out to a professional class to come and participate.
By
Baghdadi.
By
Baghdadi. Yeah. So doctors in particular. Yeah. I'm actually forgetting. He listed a series of professions in which he was interested. WMD specialist was not among them. But shortly, yes, they're not just recruiting fighters and they're not just recruiting religious authorities. They're also recruiting a professional class to make a functional state that has particular capabilities to sustain. So if we expect that ISIS wants a scientist, ISIS has a lot of money. ISIS can go out and find themselves a scientist. ISIS can also coerce one. So I think the opportunity for ISIS to achieve technical skillcraft is present.
Thank you very much, Jessica. We're nearing the end of this session, so what I would like to do for this round is just combine about 3 questions so the panelists can answer them. So see, let's go with the fourth row. Nate, right, gentleman right here. And then we go the gentleman over there and two gentlemen in the back. But make your questions brief, please.
Yes, my name is Faisal Aitani. I'm with the Atlantic Council. One of the things I feel strongly about is that there can only be a Sunni solution to this ISIS problem at the end of the day. Looking around in Iraq, every option that presents itself seems to recreate and reinforce the essence of the problem, which is an imbalance of power between disenfranchised Sunnis and the central government. If we help the central government out, we feed into this narrative. If we help the Shia militias out or cooperate with them, we make the same problem worse. That can't be divorced. When you look next door in Syria, and the Sunnis in Iraq may or may not be able to be immediately incentivized to help us against the government for a number of reasons. We look nearby in Syria and we see that there's an insurgency that is broad-based, it is Sunni, it is already fighting ISIS. So in Syria you have them fighting an insurgency rather than spearheading one. Why haven't we looked at that as a staging point for, since we're willing to pour money and weapons and training into the problem, why don't we start there?
Okay, so that's the first question. Please be brief. Okay, gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. I'm Brian Murphy, member of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for Relief and Reconciliation Middle East. Just got an email message from Baghdad about the humanitarian problems. We haven't really touched on that, but just to share with you, my friend, the Reverend Canon Andrew White, writes of 5,000 people without any covering over them. Some few have tents, no water, no food. This is a dreadful humanitarian situation. Without criticizing the governments of the UK, United States, others have not stepped in. Private groups are trying to do so, but the humanitarian need is so dire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have 2 questions all the way in the back. Nate or Phil?
Hi, Shah Quraishi. I'm a Middle East concentrator at SAIS. I had a question about the U.S. working with Iran to fight ISIS. What are your opinions on that?
Okay, thank you. And last question, and I apologize for those who are going to get cut, but we're running out of time.
Eric Gustafson with EPIC. Kind of reinforcing the first question. I know right now the immediate issue is ISIS and addressing that security threat, but looking beyond that in terms of recognizing the political side and the need to fix the governance problems of Iraq, how would you envision the U.S. role in doing that?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And General Jessica, please answer any question that you feel comfortable answering.
Well, I'll start first with the humanitarian issues. I mean, this is a huge and important element of the whole problem, and I think that it needs to be addressed as part of a long-term solution. So I mentioned that before, and I'll mention it again. I'm going to claim being too old on understanding 2 of the other questions, though, because you spoke too fast for my ears to hear. So the last guy, if you could stand up and ask your question again, please.
So,
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just asking about, in terms of addressing the political side of the challenge and the governance problems that Iraq is facing, because while even if there's success in beating back this threat by ISIS, there's still the longer-term challenge. And how do you envision the U.S. role in addressing that challenge?
thank you, Mr. Gustin. So U.S. role.
Yeah, okay, no, I got it this time, thanks. Of course, you're right. There's no long-term solution without the governmental fix. But waiting for that is not in the U.S. interest, because while we wait for that, which we'll wait for a long time, I might add, the ISIS entity will solidify, and force will be used to have changed a recognized sovereign international border. So I think there's some simultaneity that should be going on, not sequentiality in treating this issue. We ought to be, I think we are smart enough to be able to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Jessica?
So there's a fundamental linkage among all these questions in terms of what the U.S. needs to consider as we figure out what, if anything, to do. One of them is Iran and the prospect of working with them to counter ISIS. Related to that for me is the prospect of appearing or actively taking a side in something that is becoming a sectarian conflict in Iraq, which, while it sits right next to Syria, presents regional implications for U.S. policy, shifting actually to be pro-Iran at this time. Another question has to do with what the U.S. does vis-a-vis the Syrian opposition, because it is a demonstrated counter-ISIS force. And I think that much of what we've been saying, the panel actually connects these things in a beautiful way, and thank you, General Dubik, for giving us a way to see this as a simultaneous set of options that don't pursue lopsided vulnerabilities if they're pursued in tandem. Okay. I do think defeating ISIS, which is the shared interest previously described, requires ground forces, conventional forces, mobilized populations, surgical augmentation, aerial augmentation, all of these things in order to defeat this military enemy, and that one cannot pursue those things without, on the Iraq side, state security forces with tribes, with the Peshmerga, all pursuing the same aim. On the Syrian side, we sadly don't have that kind of synergy potential. We've got the Syrian opposition that has been fighting against the Assad regime long term. So I do ultimately want to say that that range of considerations for me produces a sense for opportunity, not a sense for peril, such that we would decide to do nothing in either the Iraq or Syrian context, because the problem can't be contained within just one of those country-sized policy spaces. I think we need to be thinking in terms of our regional policy, and that regional policy needs to maintain our current trajectory vis-a-vis our partners, and in the context of all other negotiations and relationships that should not be adjusted because of this conflict. It is simply also a shared threat by ISIS, and I do think that if we frame our overarching regional strategy with a sequential component, we do actually need to deal with the ISIS threat before we allow the rest of that to play out in a new way. So I'm not sure that that necessarily says that any one of these policy requirements is bigger than the other behind dealing with ISIS. I would say, though, that the opposition on the Syrian side is also hugely a requirement. Otherwise, this is going to lava lamp back and forth, as sadly we have also seen historically.
Cool. Thank you very much, Jessica. And before I conclude this session, I just want to sum it up in 3 broad points. that our panelists have informed us about. Number one, instability in Iraq is not going to be limited to Iraq. It is going to go throughout the region, and we already see the Iranian government stepping in Iraq and deploying troops, and we already see other governments doing so. Second, ISIS is not a threat to only the Iraqi Shia or the Iraqi Kurds. ISIS is a threat to all Iraqis, and therefore there has to be a comprehensive strategy and holistic strategy by the Iraq government and U.S. government and other governments to fight, to counter ISIS. And thirdly, ISIS is also a threat to the West through the foreign fighters who are going to Syria and Iraq and getting indoctrinated, and they will continue to represent a threat to Iraq. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me with a round of applause for our panelists and our wonderful staff at ISW.